This is November 9th, 2022. I want to give a big thanks to everybody who's bought my new book, Notes from Ukraine, The Shield of Europe, and to those who've given additional contributions to the Ukraine Fund. The book is still available, and for those who have given, both bought the book and given additional contributions, I'll keep in touch in terms of the distribution of those funds in the coming weeks and months. We're talking about modest amounts, but we'll be able to make a difference for a number of Ukrainians and Ukrainian families who have been so badly affected by the war. There's been a lot of speculation about what the American elections, what the impact with American elections would be on the funding of the war. And the short answer is nothing. But that would have been the likely impact regardless of the outcome of the elections, even if there had been the much anticipated red wave, because it's only the lunatic fringe, both right and left, that want America to stop funding the Ukrainians, or worse yet, to be favoring Putin's Russia in all of this. But there was no major gains from the lunatic fringe of the left or right in the American elections. The only thing that these midterm elections really point out to me is that the Republican Party needs to move on from Donald Trump. In a 2024 ticket of Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio would probably win the general election by 10 points. But I digress. Putin's new tactic is to send in swarms of Iranian drones and to freeze and starve and otherwise make life miserable for the Ukrainians in the coming winter. And missile strikes and drone strikes against civilian infrastructure and power stations, and of course it is having a terrible impact. But what it really shows is the utter desperation of the Russian military at this point. They can't win on the battlefield, so this is what they stoop to. And in the end, like everything else the Russian military has done, it'll quite likely backfire, fail miserably, and leave them worse off than when they started. The long, cold winter that's approaching is the descent of the Russian regime into utter and complete collapse. Mobilization may well have forestalled or delayed to some extent the collapse of the Russian military campaign, but it's only traded time for the truly horrific losses among those Russian recruits. And this in itself, in addition to the targeting of the civilian infrastructure that they have been undertaking in the last month or so, this tossing of thousands upon thousands of raw, relatively untrained and ill-equipped troops to the front lines is itself a war crime perpetrated against its own soldiers. So the survivors of the mobilization, they're already communicating with their loved ones back in Russia, and the narrative is not going well. So they've only added possibly more, they've only prolonged the suffering essentially, and likely that they have prolonged that suffering both for Ukraine and for Russia, because as things looked in mid-September, Russian lines may well have collapsed, and we may have been looking at the end of the conflict more or less this month, or if not by the end of the year. But as I say, even with all of the mobilized troops, it's only prolonging the inevitable. And you look at Putin's new unlimited friends, the Iranian regime, weapons possibly coming from North Korea, and of course Belarus. It's a who's who of despicable regimes in the world, and the other regimes that are still supporting Putin. In the Western Hemisphere, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the usual suspects. These are the most repugnant of the regimes in our hemisphere. And what the Iranian and the Belarusian regime may well be doing is to sharing the Russian regime's fate in all of this. So they may well be hastening the demise of their own repugnant tyrannies. But it does highlight the mobilization highlights the sad state of Russian civil society, because you saw all of the men of mobilization age fleeing Russia, but they weren't really fleeing in opposition of what the military was doing in Ukraine. All they were doing was trying to save their own necks. So it's as though what Russia is doing in and to Ukraine didn't even register to most of those guys. And this speaks of a apathy and a passivity that's genuinely shocking. It's astonishing. But at some point, Russian public is slowly but surely waking from its slumber. And we are looking at the last winter of the tyranny of the Putin regime in Russia. So again, a great big thanks to everybody that bought my book, Notes from Ukraine, The Shield of Europe. It's still available through Amazon. I'll leave some here in the States if anybody wants to get in touch with me to get some. And I'll try to put in some kind of meaningful update, perhaps on a weekly basis in the weeks to come. Slava Ukraine.